Okay, Spit, get all your dog noises out. We're about to.
No, it. Oh. How do I mute that if I need to list the beast me? If I have to list the beast me, okay.
Alright, I gotta get serious. Can't have any fun, boys. Fun is for people who wear long socks. Okay, 3, 2, 1. This is the third episode of the Tale Told by an Idiot podcast. I'm here with Pedro, and we're going to be talking about Brazilian poet Carlos Drummond de Andrade. He was born in 1902 in the Brazilian province of Minas Gerais, and that area is a big focus in some of his poems, but he came from a relatively respected family, and he went to school for pharmacy, but he really did not enjoy that profession, and shortly after he didn't work in that career. He worked mainly as a civil servant for his life and had run-ins with communist and socialist ideas, but he did remain one of the most famous Brazilian poets while he was alive and after. And I guess we can just start going into his work.
Yeah, I just want to add a thing or two. He was from Itabira, a city in Minas Gerais, and as Drake said, he was from a wealthy family. His family was the most important on the city, and he had a good education. And there's a poem from him in York's time. We are going to talk about that poem, in which he talks about how he got many good books because his father was a powerful man, and so he had everything to receive a good education to go towards a sort of aristocratic life in a sense, not like the European one, but from a Brazilian standpoint. So, during his life, he had, when he was young, a communication with some Brazilian intellectuals. He met when he was on the capital of his state studying, and he had a good relationship with many important writers of the time, and managed to make his name into the literary scene, but making it without having to insert himself into a movement or other. He was kind of independent in that way. And because of that, we can safely say he was an amazing poet because he did not try to bound himself by a movement of the time. He was true to himself to the end. Of course, he changed. We could safely say he had 3 phases, or had 4 phases. And at the end of the day, he wrote mostly about his life and Brazilian life. And we're going to discuss as much as we can about that subject. One thing I need to talk about is how little of his poetry was translated to English. Because of the volume Drake has, we are going to focus on the poems that are translated into the Multitudinous Heart by Richard Zenith. The translation was by Richard Zenith. He did write prose, but his prose was not as good as his poetry, and not only that, it was not translated to English that I know of. And not only Richard Zenith translated his poetry, but Mark Strand and Elizabeth Bishop also translated. He actually met Elizabeth Bishop once or twice, if I recall correctly. And if you want to follow, I think the best piece of translation that is available in terms not only of quality, but mostly of poems that are available is from the Multitudinous Heart from Richard Zenith, which is the version Drake has, and I managed to check 1 or 2 poems, and I like the translation.
And he's also incidentally the guy we talked about in our Pessoa podcast. Yeah. He translated most of Pessoa's work, so he's pretty well renowned as a translator anyway.
He has many experience translating the Portuguese language to English. And now what we are going to talk about?
I guess we could start with go into his first book of poems, where the seven-sided poem of 7 faces.
So let me give my introduction. As I said earlier, there is 4 phases of him, and I don't know if we will have time to discuss all of them, but the first one is the phase in which his first 3 books are. It's a more pessimistic, melancholic, and decadent phase. And it has a lot of irony, and it's the most romantical in the sense of like Lord Byron and things like that of all his faith. And we're going to read a few poems of that phase and discuss it when and make comments when the time arrives. So Drake, if you want to read any of the poems in that group.
Yeah, I think I'll just read part of the very first, the seven-sided poem, because I think it gives a good show of everything. How it, like you said, it's somewhat decadent, but also fairly humorous and kind of self-reflexive in a way too. Because it, like I guess, what is it called? Postmodern. Whenever they talk about what they're doing at the same time. So anyway, I'll just go ahead and read it. Seven-sided poem. When I was born, one of those twisted angels who live in the shadows said, "Carlos, get ready to be a misfit in life." The houses watch the men who chase after women. If desire weren't so rampant, the afternoon might be blue. The passing streetcars full of legs, white and black and yellow legs. My heart asks why, my God, why so many legs? My eyes, however, ask no questions. The man behind the mustache is serious, simple, and strong. He hardly ever talks. Only a very few are friends with the man behind the glasses and mustache. My God, why have you forsaken me? If you knew that I wasn't God, if you knew that I was weak. World so large, world so wide, if my name were Clyde, it would be a rhyme but not an answer. World so wide, world so large, my heart's even larger. I shouldn't tell you, but this moon, but this brandy, make me sentimental as hell.
Yes,
And I've always thought that second to last stanza, my heart's even larger than the world, I've always thought that was a nod to Pessoa, but I'm not sure if he was that familiar with him.
I don't know if that poem particularly he was thinking about Pessoa, but he knew Pessoa. Everyone that speaks Portuguese and have an interest in the letters, in the written word, will know Pessoa. And he has a poem, I don't remember the name, I think it's Little Sonnet to Pessoa or something like that, but it's a poem directly sent to Pessoa, but Pessoa was dead at the time, but you know, it was a kind of talk, actually not that word. It was a sort of a way of to honor Pessoa. Anyhow, one thing I forgot to talk about is to give a whole panorama of his poems because, I think we should do that before trying anything. But this first poem gives a lot of information about the nature of Drummond. But anyhow, he has, as I said, four phases, which could be said like him bigger than the world, which is this more melancholic, decadent, pessimistic, ironical, and sort of self-reflection poetry. Then there is the second phase, which was the social poetry, in which he kind of got in the same level as the world. And the best of his books, in my opinion, are from that time, which is José and the Rose of the People. And then there is a third phase in which he is kind of a symbolist phase. He retreats to a more, with a poetry like the 19th century poetry, but it's not written in the metric, but it's symbolist in nature. And then the last phase, in which books like Oxtime are present, he retreats to his childhood and focuses on the past and in his memories. Of course, in all of his work, he does reference his city, his hometown, his childhood, and the experience he had. But these are kind of the four divisions you can make of his poetry and put them in a basket and have a way to study it without getting, a way to organize his work. And anyway, this poem we read was from Some Poetry, his first book. It was the first poem on this book, and I don't think we can explain more that was already explained by the reading. It's about him. It's about how he feels himself in life. He said, the world is vast, the world is wide. If I was called Clyde, it would be a rhyme and not a solution. And I like that line because it tells how he wants to see poetry not a way to focus on a metric and scheme and a structure to make rhymes and make everything as poetry was done in the past. It's kind of modern. He says the solution is not in rhymes. about talking. I'm not sure if I'm being clear, but do you understand what I am trying to say, Drake? Or I don't know. Sometimes I have trouble speaking English.
Yeah, it makes sense.
Makes it okay. So that's this kind of thing. And I think from this same volume, we could talk about In the Middle of the Road, which is, I think, the most controversial of his poems. And I'm going to give a little bit of context in the Brazilian situation of the time. Here in Brazil, at the time, we had the modernist movement. The modernist in
What was that
Brazil,
again? Modernist?
modernist movement.
Uh-huh.
In 22, we had a week dedicated to the modernist movement. A bunch of intellectuals they wrote a manifesto, they made works, paintings, poems, novels, all trying to establish modernism as a movement in Brazil and trying to capture the true feeling of what the Brazilian literature should be. Because before that, the Brazilian literature was heavily influenced either by the Portuguese or the French. In poetry, particularly the French Parnassianist movement, I'm not sure the English the word is that. The symbolistic poetry from French was only present in Brazilian poetry of the late 19th century and early 20th century. So they tried to make a sort of true modernist, true Brazilian writing. I'm not going to discuss if they managed to achieve that or not. I'm a little bit skeptical about how important the movement really was, but this poem, In the Middle of the Road, is kind of the type of poem that was released at the time. It was on the 40s, actually, if I recall correctly, but it challenged the idea of what a poem could be. And coming from the Brazilian background of poetry was kind of really rigid about rhymes and metric and having the right amount of syllables and following the sonnet structure or a really structure that was established at the time. Drummond kind of managed to split the Brazilian literary scene of the time in two parts. The part that thought the poem was really a poem and was really artistical and had merit, and the part that thought it was not a poem. And so, anytime you want to read Drake, you should read In the Middle of the Road.
In the middle of the road. In the middle of the road, there was a stone. There was a stone in the middle of the road. There was a stone in the middle of the road. There was a stone. I will never forget that event in the life of my exhausted retinas. I will never forget that in the middle of the road there was a stone. There was a stone in the middle of the road. In the middle of the road there was a stone.
I want to add a few things about Drummond's poetry in English. He not only wrote poetry, he wrote prose too. But what was translated to English was mostly poetry. I think there was nothing translated from his prose, but I'm not sure. His most known translators are Elizabeth Bishop, Mark Strand, and Richard Zenith. Elizabeth Bishop translated his poetry, and she was alive during the time Drummond was alive too, and they met once or twice. Richard Zenith came way after, and he translated a bunch of Drummond poems and made a volume called Multitudinous Heart, which is the book we are going to focus about because it has the biggest selection that I know of Drummond's work. Drummond has the critics can divide Drummond's poetry in four phases, and all of these phases were greatly represented in the book of Richard Zenith translations. But there are one or two things that are not really easy to explore. For example, his relationship with his hometown and the effects of the mineration there and how it deeply changed the city and how deeply it changed Drummond himself. But this thing, we are not, maybe we can talk a little bit about that eventually in the podcast, but not going to be the focus on. Basically, if you want to understand Drummond, and you can easily read all of the poems that are available on the translation, we talk of Richard Zenith, and you have a good panorama and a good understanding of what his poetry was. And I'm going to talk a little bit about his four phases, so just so you can get context on what his poetry is. The first phase is the more melancholical and decadent, pessimistic, and ironical phase. His three first books, The Swamp of Some Poetry, Swamp of Souls, and The Sentiment of the World, are all from this phase. They focus more on a romantic view of the world like Lord Byron, but he has a lot of humor and kind of self-joking way of seeing the world. Then after that phase, there is the second phase, which is a more social poetry. And some critics, I think it's a well-established idea that Drummond was the poet of the people. But it's not really easy to read. It's not really accessible to read his poetry from that phase. But he directed from the people, to the people. Sorry, they are directed to the people. And books of that phase are José and the Rose of the People. And the fourth phase is the more symbolistical phase. He kind of puts himself in a position smaller than the world, So he treats and make a more symbolistical poetry. He do not go great lengths into the romanticism and great lengths into the social poetry. And the fourth phase, which is when he kind of retreats to his childhood and focuses more on his memory, and is the phase in his later years, so he kind of get a more nostalgic sense. It's books like Ox Time 1, 2, 3 are from that phase, and there are many good things you can read, and you get this sort of comfortable feeling of reading a book. I really recommend that phase for anyone. And now I think we can start reading poems and talking about them without focusing more on the technical side and the study of his poetry. Okay, so there is another poem from some poetry I think is worth mentioning. It's called In the Middle of the Road, because it was really important to define what truly was a poem. And many people in Brazil disregard completely the poem and said it was not a work of art, it was an insult and things like that. And once the reading is done, you can understand why it is like that. But I think it's a good way to kind of make not only your mark on the world of poetry, but how to express yourself, because the poem, even though it sounds repetitive and does not sound a poem at all, and now think about the time it was written, but it has a lot of things you can draw upon it, and it's not really hard to make the conclusions. So I think it's a good reading to do and to understand how Drummond saw the poetry. He did not think about, he thought about trying to write what he was thinking, not really being bound by any ropes that would make him go away or order.
One interesting thing I have to add is I've been reading about the idea of a flaneur, which is kind of like a decadent sort of person who is able to walk through the cities and is able to take in little events that maybe everyone else would ignore, but only the sort of comfortable person would be able to take in. And Walter Benjamin wrote about this actually pretty close to the time that this poem was written. And I think this poem kind of brings that as an idea, because I will never forget that event in the life of my exhausted retinas. He has a lifetime of sensory input, and then he's able to remember this one instant where he was on the road and there was a stone. And this also follows to the symbolist era. Charles Baudelaire was one of the guys who brought about the idea of a flaneur and things like that, and I think it reinforces what you were saying about his foundations, I guess you could say.
Yes, and Adorno, the communist intellectual from the Frankfurt School, he wrote a lot about music, but I'm pretty sure it was him who said the good poetry should be asocial, in the sense that the poet should not be inserted himself into the social stuff and things like that. But you see that many good poets like Baudelaire and Drummond, they could live their lives in solitude, but this kind of walking throughout the streets and experience life, the city life or the rural life, it doesn't matter. You walk alone, but you have to really have an empathic empathetic, I think is the word in English, but you have
Yeah.
to get the idea of the other and to observe their life and to make good poems. In the end, you are being really social, even though you are alone, you know? And there is, I talked about that in the first episode, but Sylvia Plath, she said at the early times when she was writing poetry at the beginning, as she did not have many experience in life, she would write about the sun, the sky, the nature, because these are subjects easy to tackle. But to talk about the city life or the rural life and to talk about poetry that can resonate in everyone is not really an easy task, and you need to live, even though it's a solitary act. There is a good lecture that Will Self made about writing as a solitary act or writing solitude. And he talks about the process of writing a novel and being alone. And I think it's a good thing to anyone listen to because there is many good insights he makes, not only about writing, but about the situation of writing nowadays. But let's proceed with the discussion of Drummond.
I think that would be a good time to move on to José, the book of poems that is well known. And I think if you want to that anecdote you were talking about how you got into Drummond, I think if you want to say that again, that was pretty interesting.
Yeah. Yes. Okay. So I think if you went to analyze the amount of times a poet is quoted in Brazil, Drummond would be far the top one because many of his poems are easily quoted, but for instance, in the middle of the road that we read, if you say in the middle of the road I had a stone, well, it can mean a lot of things and you can use in a variety of ways. But this is not the most quoted poem of him. It was Now José, or E Agora José, that unfortunately it was not translated in the Richard Zenith translations. But basically, the first line is Now José. He's asking the question to this character, José, and what to do now. Drake is going to read the poem, a translation I made, a quick translation, but the poem is kind of having no solution, being in a distressed situation and making this question, and now what I'm going to do. And whenever sometimes a bad situation arises, there is no solution, someone will quote, and now José. And I came to know Drummond because of that. Someone said, and now José. And I was like, José who? What are you talking about? And this person said, I'm quoting a Brazilian poet. This person did not know who was Drummond, but he knew what it was he was talking about because there was no solution. And then I went to research and try to find answer, and I realized it was about someone said, and now José, and I said, José who? But then this someone said, I'm quoting a Brazilian poet, and it's a thing we say when there is no solution. I was a kid back then, and then I tried to research, trying to find a solution to my question, and realized it was a quote, a line from a poem by Drummond, and it was then that I discovered who Drummond was, and I get in touch with the modernist poetry of Brazil at the time. But I did not really pay much attention to the poetry because I don't know, I was 10, I think. I was more into this sort of poetry with rhymes and schemes and being sort of rich because it sounded better. But eventually I went to the modernist movement and realized how great it was. But nonetheless, I only knew about the poet Drummond because someone quoted him, even though they did not know it was him. And I think it's really funny because that sort of situation happens a lot of the times in Brazil when people quote poems without knowing the author, or if they know, they only know the name, but do not know anything outside of that. Okay, Drake left.
And I think I'll read a little about. I'll read part of this poem so you can get an idea of where the quote comes from. But then I also want to read one called "The Moth," which is one of my favorite poems that I've read of his. And then maybe Svit, if you want to, or Pedro, if you want to read some of them in Portuguese, I think that'd be fun too. But I'll read part of "And Now José." And now, Jose, the party ended. The light ended up. The people ran away. The night cooled. And now, Jose, and now you who have no name that mocks others, you who make verses that loves protest. And now, Jose, you are without women, without discourse, without tenderness. You can't drink anymore. You can't smoke anymore. Spit, you can't anymore. The night cooled. The trolley didn't come. The laugh didn't come. Didn't come the utopia. And everything ended. And everything ran away. And everything is moldy. And now, Jose. Right, I think that gives a good idea of his feeling from the poem, at least, and where the quote comes from, if you want to read that part in Portuguese, or if you want to read the whole thing.
Yes, I'm going to read only that part, but can you read the stanza, the second stanza after you stop? Because I think it's really a good one that should deserve a reading.
With the key in the hand, that one?
Yes, that one.
With the key in the hand, you want to open the door. There is no door. You want to die in the sea, but the sea is dry. You want to go to Minas. Minas, there isn't any more. Jose, and now?
Okay, so I'm going to read only that. I'm going to read everything you read, but in Portuguese, because I think it's funny. But yes, okay. E agora, José? A festa acabou, a luz apagou, o povo sumiu, a noite esfriou. E agora, José? E agora você que é sem nome, que zomba dos outros, você que faz versos, que ama, protesta. E agora, José? Está sem mulher, está sem discurso, está sem carinho. Já não pode beber, já não pode fumar, cuspir já não pode, a noite esfriou, o dia não veio, o bonde não veio, o riso não veio a utopia, e tudo acabou, e tudo fugiu, e tudo mofou. E agora, José? And now the separate stanza that Drake said, with the key in hand, so, com a chave na mão, quer abrir a porta. Não existe porta. Quer morrer no mar, mas o mar secou. Quer ir para Minas. Minas não há mais. José, e agora? So, I want to talk, just give a little bit of context in the line, Minas não há mais, or there is no Minas anymore. I think he was talking about the changes in Minas Gerais, the state he was in. Because during the Second World War, and earlier than that, they realized that in Itabira, Drummond City, there was the largest reservoir of iron ore in the West, in the Austin. And because of that, the exploration began and the city deeply changed. And later in the life, Drummond, when someone was asking Drummond why he did not return to his hometown anymore, and he said, "Why should I return to my hometown? Everyone that I knew was dead. My house is not on the same place anymore. The church he was fond of was also destroyed by the mineration. There is a mountain formation in the city called Pico do Cauê, or the Cauê's Peak, or Mountain of Cauê, which is an image really present in Drummond's poetry, especially in Oxtime and his poetry that he treats for childhood, because it was right in front of his house. So anytime he would wake up and leave his house, he would see the mountain. And the mountain was completely destroyed because the iron ore exploration. So everything that was kind of representative of his childhood, the images that he always had in his mind, were destroyed by the mineration. So I think that line talks about that. There is no Minas Gerais isn't anymore. And actually, in all of his life, in his office, he would have a picture of that mountain. It was an old picture because black and white, but he was fond of his city, even though it was completely destroyed and only existed in his memory. And unfortunately, this kind of poems that talk about this, his childhood and what he felt about the mountain destroyed and the changes that were made, were not translated by Richard Zenit. And I actually translated one called A Montanha Pulverizada, or The Pulverized Mountain. And I think it would be good if Drake read that poem because it's really beautiful and he kind of retreats to his childhood. It's a really great poem, but it's in the present time, but he's retreat to his childhood. Can you read Drake?
Yeah, the pulverized mountain. I go to the balcony and I see my Sierra, the Sierra of my father and of my grandfather, of all the Andrades that passed and will pass, the Sierra that does not pass. It was a thing of the natives, and we took it, to ornate and to preside the life in this valley where the biggest wealth is its view, and to contemplate it. From afar it reveals the grave profile, and each bend of the road it points a form of being in iron, eternal, and blows eternity in the flow. This morning I wake up and I don't find it. Crushed into billions of splinters rolling down the conveyor belt, clogging 150 wagons in the monster train of 5 locomotives, the biggest train in the world, take note. It flees from my Sierra. It goes, leaving in my body and in the scenery miserable iron dust, and this doesn't pass. Yeah, that is a good poem. It's not in this collection, unfortunately, but it was a good one.
Yes, it is from Oxtime too, or Bom Tempo too. I don't know if I was really a good translator, but the lifeline is really important. Miserable iron dust, and the iron dust does not pass. And because he talks about the eternal image of a mountain that existed from the natives, his family took it and to contemplate, to ornate, to preside, as he points out.
So why
And
did they destroy the mountain? Because of
because
mining?
because of mining, basically the history goes like that. Uh, they, all the land was owned either by Americans or Englishmen, but because of the World War II, the Brazilian president of the time basically bought the Brazilian participation in the war in exchange for the land. It was really a good move if you think about it in political terms because he traded a couple of soldiers and winning the war actually because Brazil was important to free Italy and France, but I think only Italy. But anyway, Brazil participated in the war in exchange from lands and to set the siderúrgica industry in Brazil. And it was so many iron that in a point the biggest production of iron in the Occident, in the West, was from that place, Itabira. And it's kind of sad in a way because in the book Sentiment of the World and mostly on that book, Drummond kind of feels the weight of the war. He feels hopelessness. The first line, the first and second line of the first poem in the book is called. It goes like, "I have only 2 hands and the sentiment of the world." The idea is that he's seen everything in the world, everything bad happening, and he can do anything. But he has memories of Itabira, his city, and the mountain, and everything that was fond of the fond memories of his childhood. But that city was the catalyst point to Brazil going to war. And not only that, but it the iron production actually went to war for a brief period of time. So in a way, it has the city that made the poem, the poets that felt the stress and felt the despair of the war, and not the despair of the big people that take the decisions, but the small ones that can do anything and see the how the atrocities happening. And both produce this poet and iron industry that helped to fuel the war and helped Brazil to go to the war. So yeah, it's really striking and impactful to think about that for a second or two. Anyway,
Right, and then I'll
I
read
think
one other poem from this section called "The Moth," which is one of my favorite poems, and it reminds me of a lot of the other American modernists and European modernists of the time. All right, this is "The Moth." In this city of Rio, home to 2 million people, I'm alone in my room. I'm alone in America. Am I really alone? Just now the sound announced life at my side. Not human life, true, but it's life. And I feel the moth caught in the zone of light. 2 million people, and I wouldn't need that much. I just need a friend, one of those quiet, distant friends who reads Horace but secretly influence our lives, our loves, our flesh. I'm alone without a friend, and at this late hour, how can I find one? And I wouldn't need that much. I just need a woman, to be here this minute, to accept this affection, and save from annihilation the mad minute of mad affection I have to offer. Among 2 million people, how many women must be staring in the mirror, counting up the lost years until morning arrives with milk, the paper, some calm. But how can I find a woman at this desolate hour? This city of Rio, I'm full of tender words. I know animal sounds, I know the wildest kisses. I've traveled, fought, and learned. I'm surrounded by eyes, by hands, affections, yearnings. But if I try to reach out, there's nothing but night and a frightful solitude. Companions, hear me. That agitated presence trying to break through the night isn't just the moth. It's the softly panting secret of a man. Yeah, I think must be a good translation too, because.
Yeah. Yes, I was following. It's a good translation.
And then I think we can go, unless you want to make a comment about that, we can go to his next book of poems called Rose of the People. And one of the most striking ones to me in that collection is Death of the Milkman, because it seems somewhat different to me as far as the focus he puts on images, especially with color, at least near the end of that poem. But
yes, I think because of
do you know anything especially about that book of poems?
Well, that book of poems, Rose of the People, is probably the most important of his work. I think it's the longest one. I'm not sure, but I think it is. It has like 60 poems or something, and it's the most representative of the second phase. Basically, the José, which is the other book of this phase, has like 50 poems. So the book of that phase is from Rose of the People, and we could discuss. I don't think we have time, but the social poetry of Drummond is basically that book. And he talks about the rose. The rose is an image of the rose blossoming. Sorry, I talk in Portuguese now. The rose blossoming would be the idea of a new world, for the people. There is actually one poem in that section called Letter to Stalingrad, which was not translated. But the thing is, the book was written in 45. The Second World War was ending, and the Battle of Stalingrad was there already. The Soviet Union is in fact deciding the war on the Germans, destroying the Germans. And a lot of Drummond's idea of what it would be to save the world in the sense of having a more social conscience was described in that book. Actually, the most representative poem on that book is the first one, Náusea and the Flower, or A Flor e a Náusea in Portuguese. But it's a huge poem, and I don't think we should read it. But one thing I want to add about that book is, although it's directed to the people in the sense of being a new way of thinking, it's really hermetical in the sense that it's not an easy book to read. Even though it's directed to the people, it's only a book fully appreciated by people that have knowledge in poetry and can understand the imagery and the symbolism in each of his poems. So it's kind of ironical in a sense because he goes both ways. And I don't think we should keep discussing that because we don't have enough time, and there are 3 or 4 poems that are worth reading. And so I think we can read Death of the Milkman.
All right, so this is Death of the Milkman. The country's short on milk. It needs to be delivered early. The country's full of thirsty people. It needs to be delivered early. There's a saying in this country that the only good thief is a dead one. And so, before the break of day, the young man who's the milkman makes haste with his milk can to take good milk to bad people. His milk can, his bottles, and rubber shoes announce to sleeping men and women that someone woke up early and came from the outskirts to bring the coldest, whitest milk from the best cow, so everyone will be fortified for the hard struggle of city life. The white bottle in his hand doesn't have the time to say all that I ascribe to it. And the unschooled milkman, who's an employee of the dairy, a resident of Hua Namur and 21 years old, has no idea what an impulse of human empathy might be. And since he's in a hurry, his body leaves only the merchandise on the doorstep of each building. Given that the back door might also conceal people who aspire to the little milk available in our time, let's walk down that alley, enter the hallway, and set down the bottle. Without making any noise, of course, since making noise solves nothing. My milkman, so nimble, graceful, and light-footed, doesn't walk, he glides. But he always causes some slight noise, a wrong step, a flower pot in the way, a dog barking on principle, or a contentious cat, and someone always wakes up, grumbles, goes back to sleep. But this someone who woke up panicked, thieves infest the neighborhood, and wasn't going to waste time. The gun in the drawer jumped into his hand. A thief? This gun's for him. The shots in the night liquidated my milkman. If he was happy, if he was good, if engaged, if a virgin, I don't know. It's too late to know. But the one who shot him lost all his sleep and ran outside. My God, I killed an innocent man. A bullet for killing burglars can also rob the life of our brother. Whoever wants to can call a doctor. The police aren't laying a finger on this son of my father. No harm has come to the property. The general night continues. Morning is slow to arrive, but the milkman lying there in the open air has lost his former hurry. Something thick is trickling from the shattered bottle on the now quiet pavement. Milk or blood, I don't know. Among the hazy shapes, barely liberated from night, two colors grope for each other and softly touch and lovingly embrace, creating a third shade that we call dawn. And I just have to say, the thing that struck me most about this poem is that that imagery of color at the very end, where the like complete purity of the milk and the sacrifice that it takes to bring the milk is mixed with the blood of the person who also delivers the milk, and that creates the dawn, which is generally considered a hopeful time or a beauty, a beginning. But
Yes, yes, like that. You know, the rose of the people, the rose kind of blossoming in new time. And I think this last stanza captures well that feeling, the milk, the purity. Also a reminder of the work of the milkman and the blood, which is product of the struggle and the fight. And they join together to produce the doll. So yes, it's a good imagery of the not only good for the poem's sake, but it's also good to understand the whole idea of the poem. The poem, no, sorry, the whole idea of the book, the roles of the people. And you know, this is kind of what the book's about having a new way, a new door, and realizing things are not really easy for the common people, but there is something to be done. And because of that, he kind of flirted with communists when he was 40, which is among that time. And there is actually one funny history that I want to talk about. Basically, at the time in Brazil, the communist movement was illegal. And I'm not going to dwell why it was illegal, but basically, there was a president in Brazil that was 15 years in power. So it was kind of a dictatorship in a way. He did many good things, but it was not democratic in the sense. There was no votes. He was president for 15 years. He was considered the father of the poor people because he made many populist acts. And I agree with many of what he did in regard of economical points, but politically he was kind of an ass, you know. And Drummond went to visit the leader of the communist movement in prison at the time, and he said, "What should I do to engage myself politically and to do something for the society?" He thought that communism would be the answer at the time. And then Júlio Prestes, the leader of the communist movement in Brazil, he was in jail, and he said, "Go to this journal and try to make things there." And basically, he set the path to Drummond go to the journal, And Drummond became one of the directors. And Drummond was kind of excited to that and started trying to work there and say, talk with people. But later he realized that it was not really easy, and there was many people that did not really want to change things, but rather to engage themselves in the movement to get political benefits, like getting power and not really work for the common people. And Drummond kind of began to distanciate himself. He could work with any of the other directors, and he said, "Okay, I'm basically not going to participate in the journal." But his name was still there, and he did not want to remove his name because even though he was not participating, many people there had a good heart and were trying to change the world. And if he removed his name, it was going probably be bad for the communist movement. Someone would write in a journal like Brazilian poet tries to work with communist party and realize communist journal and realize they are not good people. So to kind of linger the illegality of the movement. It was not going to be good, and Drummond said, "Okay, I'm not going to remove my name." And someone, and this moment in Drummond's life is kind of hard to understand because he erased all of his journal entries and little is known about that time. But someone, maybe Drummond, maybe it wasn't him, put Drummond's name to run for the Communist Party. And at that time, specifically, the Communist Party was not in the illegality anymore. It was a brief period of time. And Drummond was one of the names running. But apparently, either Drummond started to dislike the idea of running after, or it was not really his intentions, but his name was not on the. His name was removed before the official list came. So he was only there kind of a pre-candidate. Anyhow, after a brief moment, the Communist Party was illegal once again. And they, instead of going to political positions, they started to infiltrate themselves into the intelligentsia and the academia and so on. And there was an association of writers, and Drummond was one of the important figures there. And there was going to be an election to put the president of the association and other relevant people. And basically, there was two groups. One in which Drummond was part of, wanted ideological neutrality, wanted a group of people just discussing the writers' association by and for the writers, and not bounded by any ideology. But there was a group, the communist group, that wanted to start making the association work for the communist goals. And basically, there was a lot of heated argumentation, and the results were in, and the neutral group won. And Drummond was there making the discourse with the people saying, "Okay, now we want to a more neutral association and so on." And the communist movement was really mad, and they physically attacked Drummond, actually. So it's kind of sad how the poet that wanted a poetry for the people, that wanted to change the world and try to go towards a more political instance and to change Brazil from how he could, went to become beaten by communist people. It's really sad because you realize it has more to do with political strategies and power rather than intentions. And I think that's a good story to share. I think it's good.
And are there any other poems that you wanted to read before you wrap this up?
I don't know. Let's see. Which one? Maybe Residue is a good poem to be read. It's from the Rose of the People.
You want to try to get one from his later years, or you just want
to? Okay, maybe from Oxtime Green Library is a good one. I really like that poem.
Okay. Yeah, we'll do that one. I think it's good to get one from his later years also. You should read one Portuguese just just any one that you think is good. But I'll read this one in English, The Green Library from Oxford. All right, this is Green Library. Daddy, buy me the International Library of Famous Literature. Just 24 volumes, bound in green, percaline cloth. Son, that's too much reading for a little boy. Buy it anyway, Daddy. I'll grow up soon. When you grow up, I'll buy it. Not now. Daddy, buy it for me now. It comes in green percaline, just 24 volumes. Buy it, buy it, buy it. Calm down, boy. I'll buy it. Rio de Janeiro, this is the Colonel. Send me your library post-haste. Make sure it's well packed. I want it in perfect condition. If it arrives with scratches, I'll refuse it and demand my money back. No problem, Colonel. Your wish is our command. The library is sent by train in a fancy aluminum and pinewood crate. From the end of the train line, a pack mule carries that enormous universe. It arrives with the fragrance of brand new paper, a green pinewood forest. I'm the richest boy in those parts. Not proud, just envious of myself. No one else around owns this collection of famous literature. I have to read it all. Before I start reading, how good it feels to pass my hand over the sound of percaline, that fluidly transparent crystal, green. Tomorrow I'll start reading. Not now. Now I want to see illustrations, all of them. The Temple of Thebes, Osiris, Medusa, Apollo naked, Venus naked. Holy Lord, the books show that? Now the letters, the words. I have to read everything. My mother complains, this child doesn't sleep. My brother gets mad. Turn the light off, moron. Wax falls on the bed, burning my leg, my sleep. You watch it or I'm going to rip that library to shreds before it sets the house on fire. Go to bed, boy, before I lose my temper and give you a good spanking. Sleep, dear child. So silly, so weak. But I read. I trip and fall on philosophies, then write again my green book, the night caught up in cavalries. I see myself living in stories, poems, how I devour you, green pasture. Or are you a carriage for escaping myself and bringing me instantly back home, just by my closing the covers? It teaches me everything I know, what I'll know much later or never, is in that library bound in murmuring green, flute percolating forever. And now it may be that Drummond is part of the Green Library. He speaks of.
Aqui havia uma casa viajamos na família. Casamentos, hipotecas, os primos tuberculosos, a tia louca, minha madrinha, pelas escravas, rangendo cenas no povo. Porém nada dizia. E mais de uma velha revolta nos dividindo no escuro.